Interaction North America. Among John's many roles at GroupM is to oversee the privacy and data policies for the company, and he's very active in the industry associations as they craft a lot of the best practices and policies around the data revolution. I think many of you already know John. Please welcome John Montgomery.
Look at you guys. Is that okay? I'm really lucky to be up here with some of the smartest data thinkers in an extremely exciting space. I'll get them to introduce themselves and their companies in a minute. It's never been a better time to be a data geek. We're all hiring mathematicians. It's just absolutely amazing. When I started this job about 5 years ago, I proclaimed to our company and to the business that the cornerstone of our business strategy should be built around data. And there were some nervous glances then, but absolutely not today. And it's remarkable how fast it's moved. No self-respecting marketing, media, or research conference starts without us paying homage to data being the lifeblood of our business, and I'm sure you've heard it several times today. So if there isn't a Luma chart about this ecosystem already, expect one soon. There's a flood of new acronyms starting with the letter D, and this could be controversial. So the purpose, and I think Steve introduced it a little bit, the purpose of a Grill the Vendors panel today is to see what value that these companies who represent a fairly wide spectrum of data vendors, what they add to the supply chain. Are they all competing for the same marketing dollar? Are there already too many in the space, and is there room to work together? Are there new data segments emerging? Are the costs that they add to the marketing budget worthwhile? How will the marketers maintain control over security, continuity, and particularly over their most precious asset, data? So move to the edge of your seat. You're about to find out the answers to those questions. So I'd like you firstly to meet the panel. Keith, Matt, Jim, JP, and Lara. I wonder if we could let's start off the conference by introducing yourself, but whilst you introduce yourself, let's introduce the question of, in thinking about the data supply chain, how does each of your organizations add value to the equation? Keith, do you want to start off?
Sure. My name is Keith Johnson. I'm the general manager for iBehavior Interactive. We've been doing data and analytics for close to 15 years now. Work with about 2,500 clients worldwide. In terms of what we do that's unique is we help connect brands with consumers, and the way that we do that is through the use of better analytics and better data.
Hi, my name is Matt Clark, and I head the publisher development team for Quantcast. At Quantcast, we really believe that in order to understand and segment and act on digital audiences, the first thing you need to do is a really good job of measuring them. And Quantcast pioneered direct audience measurement several years ago. We've been doing that for about 7 years, and we now leverage that measurement technology to provide a couple of different services to the market. We provide our Quantcast measurement offering, which is an offering for publishers and advertisers alike to understand and categorize and segment their audiences at a very deep level. And then we also provide our Quantcast advertise offerings, which are ways for performance marketers, brand marketers, advertisers, publishers to segment those audiences in a way to deliver ads to them so that their ads are delivered to the people they are most appropriate for.
JP?
JP Beauchamp with SymphonyIRI. IRI basically is deeply entrenched in one vertical, which is the CPG vertical. My role at IRI is sort of looking at it from an analytic perspective and how I can tie offline data and CPG and retail to the online world. And from a measurement perspective, understand the impact of that data and that targeting on moving incremental sales.
Lara?
Hi, I'm Lara Mehanna. I am the general manager of mobile for DataXu. DataXu is a company, it's a demand-side platform whose roots are really in the optimization around all the aspects of big data. So as much information as we get, we work on behalf of advertisers and really maximize the value of those dollars so that they can get the returns that they're looking for. Being in the mobile space, one of the really interesting things that we are looking at is how we identify these users across all the different devices and how important it is to really understand not only what devices people are using, but how they interact with them, what they are doing, and what the value is that we can then bring back to the advertisers when they're looking to place their ad dollars.
Yeah, that's terrific. So let's take it one step forward then and just start talking a little bit more about how perhaps you could work together. So Keith, an important part of your offering at iBehavior is a data cooperative that you encourage your clients to join. Do you also interact with other players in the space, with each other, and are you competitors or partners or both? And so we've heard from each of you what your offering is, but how do we put it together? Are we starting to see segments that can work together, or are you competitors?
Yeah, the short answer is both. For the clients that we work with today, we absolutely encourage them to contribute their data to the cooperative. The idea being that if you have 2,500 companies all working together, we get a much crystal clearer picture view of what John Smith does and how he interacts across all those 2,500 different brands and what we would get independently. We do partner, though, for things that need to be partnered to deliver the ultimate solution to the brand. For example, a company may come to iBehavior to help them understand about their consumer, to build an audience who's appropriate for their ad campaign. Ultimately, that may be provisioned through a company like DataXu to go ahead and execute that campaign through. So in a lot of ways, we tend to partner together as well. And if there's data assets we don't have, the other core understanding is that we can use what we call third-party data or data seeds from other sources that we may not otherwise have access to use a model and profile. So I think to a large degree in this space, we tend more towards partnering and co-opetition.
Yeah, I mean, JP, how do you manage co-opetition like that? How do you draw the line between where you compete and where you cooperate and where you can add to each other's business?
What I would say is, first of all, we know what we can do well and what we can't do well. And in that sort of construct, we look for partners who can take our data and bring it to life. And in the CPG space, it's important that we're able to communicate with consumers and CPG manufacturers in a way that we've done historically, and in the back end try to measure that. So folks like Quantcast and iBehavior that can bring that data to life for us, we consider partners, not even frenemies. So part of the ecosystem that we want to fuel and fund. So I see very few direct competitors from my perspective, and many more partners, though it's a broad lunascape, as you said before.
Lara, you had something to add to that?
Yeah, I like how he says, everyone has kind of a piece that brings it to life, because I think then when you talk to somebody, that's in the demand side platform space or digital management platform, it goes even one step further, because now we're using the algorithms to make all this information and all this data that's available really actionable, right? So how do you use it? How do you know what these consumers want? How can you engage with them? And how do you know that the value of your ad dollars are actually paying off for you? So I think we all kind of bring the data to life in a very different way, which is how we can really work together. So it makes it really exciting.
Matt?
Yeah, that's when we think about partnering, and we do have a partnership with SymphonyIRI. I think that point that JP made is a good one, which is you look for partners who are good at something you're not good at, and you look for partners who will benefit from the things that you're good at. So one of the things that SymphonyIRI has is a very deep understanding about a select group of people and their CPG purchase habits. And the thing that we have is one of the largest media consumption databases in the world, and the computational horsepower to sift through that and make predictive insights as a result. And so we create a joint product based on seed data from the panel that JP's organization has, and we extend that because we have reach into the entire US internet to provide publishers and advertisers with the ability to do predictive advertising against people who are likely to spend in certain categories. And we can only do that because they've got something we don't have, and we have something they don't have.
I'm a little worried. This is way too friendly. I have to try and figure out something more contentious. But in truth, we at GroupM are big buyers of media as well. And I, in fact, contend that there aren't enough partners yet. This business is exploding so fast. It has so many pieces, and those pieces have got pieces, that whilst I think it was a leading question, which you've all answered well, the market still has to shake out, but there's lots and lots of room for people to compete and to cooperate. We just see so much need in mobile, in social, there are just so many unanswered questions that there are so many more companies will come up to answer. So then that was terrific. I think, Matt, Quantcast has been in the space for a while. I think that you together with a couple of competitors owned the space for a long time. But there's been an explosion of companies in the space, and has that kind of benefited advertisers, or is it kind of creating unnecessary noise, unnecessary confusion?
Well, the answer's sort of both, because on the one hand, massive infusion of venture capital and entrepreneurial activity has spurred a lot of talent entering an ecosystem and a lot of development of technology that's getting this industry to a place where it's got really well-baked science behind what actions are taken and how dollars are being distributed. So that's fantastic, because the more money that's pumped into the system, the more engineers and analysts and PhDs and smart executives we can hire to create these kinds of innovations. The challenge with that is that all of these people obviously want to be heard, and they want to market the supposed uniqueness of their offerings, regardless of how unique they may actually be. Some are, and some are less so. And so that creates some confusion, because there's more of that going on than there is time in the day for the buyers to listen and sort through it all. Now, we have a theory, which is that over time, performance will be the great equalizer of all of that, and that ad dollars will shift over time towards the upper echelon of people who've really developed differentiated technology that drives meaningful outcomes for advertisers and for publishers. And so over time, that confusion will resolve itself, but we're at a point where it's crescendoing a bit. So
are there a lot of companies out there that are not adding value, that are not getting you talked about the upper echelon of data and the quality data. Are there people coming into the market that aren't quality, and could that be causing the confusion?
I think there are a lot of people in the market, and I think I can't speak to whether various companies in the market are or aren't providing quality. I can speak to what I think quality is, which is quality data is data that drives a meaningful outcome for the advertiser. And that means it has to be an outcome that actually is related to a business goal. It has to be an outcome that you can provide at scale and that you can repeat time and time again. And I think that there's a number of technologies that maybe can't meet all of those criteria.
Lara, too many DSPs?
Absolutely. I was going to say, I think that there are a lot of companies out there trying to solve a lot of problems, because there are a lot of challenges in this space, right? As we start thinking, we were in display, we moved from print over to digital. Now from digital, we're going across into social, into mobile, into video, into TV. And it's getting very complicated, because we don't really understand fully yet. Everyone's got all these ideas as to how we can kind of identify kind of a specific user or groups of users, or figuring out how to get the attribution across. So a lot of people are trying to solve a lot of these challenges. What's happening, though, is that a lot of companies are coming up, and really what they're doing is building features. So I think where we could see the confusion is that there's so many companies out there trying to make $1 based on a feature, which is a really great feature, but if we start some of that consolidation of all these features, we're actually going to have a really good quality product. So I think over time, you're going to see that some of these companies really need to work together more closely to build, the quality the way that advertisers and end users really, really want it.
Yeah. JP, do you see the space being crowded in your area?
In my area, no, but I just maybe as a rule of thumb, I sort of look at it this way. From a data perspective, well, first of all, what I said earlier, which is this notion of knowing who you are and what your limitations are. Letting your data go free, which is sort of an interesting issue, and probably another question around privacy. And then the third thing is that you want to make sure that your data is projectable, pervasive, and performance-centric. In other words, it describes what it is, the business issue that you have out there. It's scalable, and you can measure it. For a company like ours that's been doing this work for the CPG manufacturing industry for the last 30, 35 years, I guess now, that there are a lot of spaces, especially in analytics, where there's a little bit of fly-by-night activity. There's a lot of promises that are made, a lot of features that are added that don't get to those core business issues. And I think that's something as a word of caution. Though crowded, to Matt's point, I think there will be sort of a settling out, like in all industries and businesses, and the best will rise to the top, without being, it's a little cliche, but the idea of it all settling out, and if you know that the input, again, is projectable, pervasive, and performance-oriented, you can be measured, then you know you've got a good partner out there.
Yeah. And I think my earlier point, to expand on it, I don't want to say it's easy, but compared to the larger problem that I'll get to in a second, it's relatively easy to do something very, very unique and high performance for a small group of users or a small audience once. It's really, really hard to do that at the scale of 250 million people and to keep doing that for every advertiser and every industry and every publisher hundreds of times per month. And that's where I think the market hasn't quite shaken out yet into who can do that for small groups of people and who can do that for the whole US or global internet.
I mean, talking a little bit about quality and confidence, I get over to Washington quite a bit to talk about privacy, and at a kind of a recent visit with the Commerce Congress Committee, we were talking about privacy and trust of the business, and it suddenly became evident to me that the bigger issue in Washington, if we thought that privacy was an issue, security is going to become an even larger issue. It's a huge issue for legislators, and I think an increasing concern for consumers, because I think the press are hyping up all of the accidents that happen, and quite rightly, I guess. So consumers are starting to follow and get a little bit concerned about this. So kind of all of you control kind of a lot of data. How do you think that security of both consumer and corporate perspective, how do we think about that? How do we build confidence in the marketplace? How do we build confidence with legislators that we're using that kind of data responsibly, so that we can head off serious legislation in this area? Jim, JP, sorry.
Well, I think first of all, my first rule in internet marketing is don't be creepy. So the notion is that consumers have a right to be, sort of understood, to be concerned in this scenario that we have a lot of stuff about them, and we have a certain responsibility not to go out and again be creepy, to keep our data secure, to use it in a way that's responsible. I certainly don't want to see getting into a regulatory discussion. I mean, from my perspective, our data is a little bit different. We have double opt-in panels. They know that they're participating in these types of things, or we're looking at, instead of people, things like brick and mortar sales, which makes it sort of a different discussion, because you're not as worried about those things. But even so, even within our panel, where people are opt-in and they know they're a part of something, you have a responsibility to keep those things secure. I mean, we want to follow whatever the industry is, and as I let my data go free, the responsibility my partner has for not mucking it up is a fairly big responsibility. And I think there's another notion in the previous question is you have to know when to walk away. And one of the first things that we want to understand is as we give this asset that we spent hundreds of millions of dollars building on our side, that it's not going to get into a situation where it undermines the relationship that we have with those people that are participating in the programs they're participating in, or the retailers who we spend a lot of money with, retailers like Walmart, who want their data trusted. And we also will use, speaking of knowing what you can and can't do, using a lot of third-party data. We use Axiom to keep our data secure, all of our POS data, as opposed to keeping it in-house for a variety of reasons, but the main one being privacy and scale. So it's that notion of we know we have an inherent responsibility, a slightly different issue, and our partnership selection is going to be predicated on their security along with the security that we already do.
Yeah. Keith, how do we do this, and how do we build? I think it's both doing it, but then convincing people that we're doing it well. So there's a kind of a communication gap in this area with Washington and consumers. Consumers don't know how we're doing all the good things that we're doing with data. They assume the worst.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think the big part of the problem with data is there's a fear of the unknown. People don't understand data. They don't understand what's out there. They immediately assume the worst. Everybody has my data. Oh my gosh, what are they going to do with it? From our perspective, the data industry is not new. This has been around for close to 50 years. We've been working with retailers who have used data as a strategic asset for a long, long time. So from our point of view, this is nothing new. I think that what's new is the application of data in digital, and we really have a lot of work to do to educate consumers on that. So you talk about companies like iBehavior, or Axiom, or Experian. We have all been in the data space for a long, long time. We have great data security and control measures in place. The real threat is for newcomers who come onto the scene who don't understand how to manage data, what happens in a cookie stamp, for example, data loss, data leakage, data theft, who have to learn all these things from scratch. So I think from our point of view, from an industry point of view, we really just need to do more education.
Yeah, Matt, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the industry sort of shares a mutual responsibility to be good actors, and we're big fans of industry self-regulation. We partner with folks like the IAB around ad choices to make sure small and medium-sized publishers can get access to that technology at economically favorable conditions, and newcomers who don't either understand or who are trying to make a quick buck. I mean, over the years in ad tech, there have been many companies that have come and gone trying to make a quick dollar. If they act poorly with people's data, that gives the entire industry a bad name. People will just focus on the few people who came in and did something creepy, and not the rest of us who are going to great lengths to cooperate as an industry to make sure we're handling people's data appropriately and to make sure we're being very, very transparent, I think, to your point about what we have, what we don't have, and how we're using it.
Yeah, I think the part of the problem is that if someone, and I won't name the company who did this, but you might remember last year, one company lost 21 million personal records on someone's laptop left in an airport. That kind of thing has to end, because otherwise we all get sucked along with it. And it's something that is critical, and every time that happens, the regulators become more resolute to regulate, and secondly, the consumers just don't trust us. I think Shelley Palmer wrote a great article this week. I think it was Shelley who just said that we're now descending into the realms of tobacco companies and banks, in terms of consumer reputation. And whenever you ask consumers if they mind their data being collected, progressively it gets worse and worse and worse. So we've got a lot of catching up to do in terms of transparency and responsibility in the security level.
I think part of that is also that the amount of data that's becoming available now is humongous. It's never been so available in such large quantities, and I think we all have responsibility and accountability in this space, but users are not used to understanding that their digital footprint is growing at tremendous speed with a tremendous amount of information without them necessarily doing much than kind of going through different sites. Maybe they're signing up here, signing up there through Facebook, all the Connect information. There's so many places now where information is being collected that it's so much larger than it ever was before. So I think that's kind of what escalates why security is really, really important now, because we haven't actually taken into consideration fast enough how to secure all this data so that it can be usable in a really accountable, responsible way.
Yeah, and to that point, just one quick thing to add. I mean, we don't really need do not track. What we need more is FCRA for the data world. It's just a different way of thinking. Do not call doesn't work for the online ad industry. What consumers do need, though, is data protection, data rights, security and safety in terms of how we manage and protect that data.
Yeah, there seems to be a gap between what we're telling consumers I know that we're being responsible, or trying to be responsible, but consumers have no idea of really how we're using their data, how much data we store, who we're sharing it with. And a particular passion point of mine is that I think consumer education is really what we should be focusing on. Lara, whilst you've got the microphone, let's talk. We talked a little bit about, you've spoken about the huge amount of data out there. There's obviously good quality data, and there's not such good quality data. I think we all know that the cliche of not all data is created equal. What makes good data versus bad data, and let's explore that for a little while.
Sure. So from our perspective, what makes good data is that, of course, it needs to be actionable. We talked a lot about performance before, so something that we can act upon. We know that it's going to do good if it is utilized, or it's going to change behavior or entice somebody to do something based on what the advertiser wants. But the other components that are around that are also recency and the ability to do it actively. So the whole idea around demand-side platforms is really algorithmically, actively looking at all this data and making decisions in real time. So anything that we can combine the action with the recency, with the fact that we can process it really quickly so that we can help make those right decisions is really what determines what good quality data is. So it could really almost be any variable as long as it's really authentic and actionable and in real time. And that's kind of how we identify what's good quality data.
And I mean, your area is mobile, right? So it's real time, always on, all the time, and so you're processing a great deal of data.
It's interesting. The amount of data that you can get in a request from online is actually still more than what you can get in mobile, because we still have yet to figure out fully how to get all the data through, right? There's a lot of discussion out there around IDs and how if somebody downloaded an app or not, or they're on this web browser. So there's been a lot of people hesitating around that. There's a lot of obfuscating of information that gets passed through. So we do get more data in terms of location and a lot of attributes around mobile, but in some ways, because you don't have a cookie or other attributes the way you do in display, you kind of get less data. So we're trying to solve the same problem, yet apply different tactics and figure out how we can make apples and oranges work like apples in a way. So it actually makes it even more complicated.
Yeah. Matt, do you want to do?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that recency point. I think that's a really important point that often doesn't get asked about when data buying decisions are made. And one of the advantages of the way we approach data is we see every single person on the U.S. internet. It's something like 600 to 800 times a month, which means that as people's behaviors change, as their intent to purchase certain products change, as all those things about these people change, we're able to adapt our modeling approaches on the fly if someone makes any change in their behavior or their intent to do something. And if the data you're acting on is that someone stated intent to purchase a luxury retail product 2 weeks ago, and you're acting on that today, there's a very high likelihood, given the purchase cycle of a product like that, that you're acting on data which is completely irrelevant. And so when people are thinking about buying data, asking questions like, what's the recency of this data? How often is the data that goes into this model refreshed, and how does the model act on it? Those are all good questions for a data buyer to be asking.
Yeah, and I would just add something else. It's funny that we're sitting here talking about digital and we're back to RFM, direct marketing principles from 50 years ago. But also, in addition to recency, when we talk about quality or good or bad, 99% of people who visit the Ferrari website are not going to buy a Ferrari. So the recency of me visiting there has no indication of my likelihood to buy a Ferrari. So I think when we talk about good and bad, data isn't intrinsically good or bad. It's the intelligence that we put behind that data element that make it good or bad. So I think as we amass this mountain of data, what really becomes more important is data reduction strategies and the analytics behind how we use it, to actually be smart with it.
On that too, it's kind of interesting you bringing that up, because I was just thinking here about mobile. A lot of times now we can actually determine what kind of location is being passed through. Sometimes people, when they sign up for a site, they say this is my home zip code. That can get passed through as a location, but you can also get the location where you are right now. So advertisers are actually starting to think and determine what do they want. So to your point, like, are they going to buy a Ferrari now or not? Well, if they're looking at other types of sites, the location they are at that moment may determine a better ad than maybe what their home zip code is. So the recency really comes to play a lot with these mobile devices, and as we can determine that, advertisers now have more options to say this is how I want to go target my users.
Yeah, so I understand the fact that there really isn't good and bad data, but it's the way we use data. But as a buyer, and for the agencies and for the marketers in this room, we see a lot of data vendors, and we get promised a great deal, and it's difficult in the sell for us to be able to assess what's good and what's bad. Help us give the agencies and give the marketers some advice about when we're being sold to. How do we recognize the data that's going to deliver the insights? How do we recognize the good guys from not the bad guys, but we always know what the quality is when we look at the ROI, but that's when we spend, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars. So kind of upfront, how do we do that? Lara?
So we often like to be a little bit more agnostic out of the gate, right? So we always say go big and then let's go more narrow. So we would recommend usually trying different data partners out, and let's put the proof in the performance, right? What's really delivering either the engagement rates, the conversion rates, the, whatever it is that advertiser is looking for, let's see what is working. And we have seen that different types of data tends to work better in different types of environments for different types of advertisers. So we use that knowledge base to go back out to these advertisers as they're coming in, but usually it's about going broad, seeing who's passing all that information, what insights we can garner, providing the transparency back to those brands, and then making further decisioning. So, for a start of a test, it provides a really good kind of goal setting for the rest of the campaign without having to invest the entire campaign in one tactic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would say you do have to test and learn. We encourage that as well, and I also agree with that. The proof is in the performance for the ROI, but if you want to do that up front prior to spending hundreds of thousands of dollars or more on a campaign, the real question is, can you give me back real data? Meaning lots of times we get challenged by clients, say, look, here's 1 million of my customers, tell me what you know about them, and we'll supply them back information we know about them. From a client-facing point of view, it's always good to ask questions you already know the answers to, so if the answers come back and they match what you already know about those customers, then it's a very quick litmus test to say that company has accurate data.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add, I said before, projectable for pervasive and performance. So on the projectable side, you've got to be willing to be transparent, to put it out there as a, from a responsibility perspective, we need to be measured. Does it actually describe the industry in which you say it describes, and does it do it well? And if it does, then you should be willing to put skin in the game and do a test. If you're not, or a data vendor is not willing to do that, then I think you have a big question mark. The next part being, does it scale? And then finally, to your point on the ROI side, on the back end, they're willing also to measure response. And in fact, we do it, and I know that other folks do it as well, offer up ROIs as part of a package, essentially for free, to show how well it does do in those pervasive and projectable metrics you see up front, so that as the next time you go out and buy, what it is that you're looking for, what are the proof points, and so you can do a better job. Because at the end of the day, even though we're a data company, we tend to be agnostic as well. It doesn't matter what the data source is, as long as it's projectable, pervasive, and you're willing to do performance, you should use what's best for your client to answer the business question at hand, whoever that is.
Yeah, Matt, I was going to say, if you were sitting where an agency or a marketer is sitting, what advice do you have for us for picking out the best vendors?
Well, I would say first, pick a performance metric that's meaningful and related to the campaign goal. So I know as an ad tech industry, we've been deriding the click for going on a decade now, but I'm going to keep flogging that horse till it's dead. So pick a metric that actually moves the needle for the business. So one of the things about seeing so much internet activity like Quantcast does is we have a really good idea of what people who click on ads look like and what people who buy things look like. And I can tell you overwhelmingly that those two groups of people almost never overlap, like just never, and we reams of data to support that. And whereas one of the things in the product we've built with SymphonyIRI is we go in and tell people, don't take our word for it on methodology, and please don't optimize this to clicks. We'll offer together a study which shows how many people actually went into D'Agostino and bought some yogurt. And that's a meaningful outcome that you drive. And I think the most important thing is to understand if data is good, you've got to actually measure the outcome, whether in demographics, that's a Nielsen online campaign ratings report, or in CPG targeting, that's an offline purchase study through a partner of ours like IRI. Attaching measurement to the outcome is the single most important thing someone can do to separate good data from bad data.
Yeah, so I'm hearing that obviously if one could test and do controls, if you don't, but sometimes I think marketers would say to us, we rarely have the time to do that, and sometimes we don't have the money to do these tests. So is part of the answer offering tests or small tests for nothing or for free? Is that sometimes what you're asked to do?
Absolutely.
Yep.
I mean, people ask to run tests all the time, but it's not really about giving away media or giving away tests for free. I think you need to ask the question, show me, right? And let's look under the hood. Let's see what's there. A really good company that knows what it's doing, regardless of having launched a campaign, can provide not just the case studies, but show me how you put your insights together. What type of information can you give back to me? Regardless of what level of data I'm using, how are you using all that information? And I think a lot of really good companies will be that transparent, and they will show you how it's been utilized with other campaigns or in a live environment, and that will give you more of a assuredness, I think, in making that investment. And that's usually how we approach it, because we can provide so much insight and so much transparency and look at so many different attributes and kind of stack them against each other and show how they move over the time of day. And that really seems to resonate very, very well with these advertisers and agencies, because they almost like can feel it. It's like they feel that the data is working for them.
Yeah, and I would add, from the analytics perspective, which is where I sort of sit, is we're a third-party independent, so we want to come in there and evaluate. We have a reputation, et cetera, that we want to maintain. But it's not all altruism giving this away. Our larger view is that we want CPG. It's a rising tide lifts all boats. So we want to see more and more CPG manufacturers, marketers, retailers come into this space. And we know from 30 years of doing this that everything that they do, whether it's trade, consumer, television, what have you, has to be measured. So in spaces that are relatively new to them, relative to other marketing elements, it's our obligation to throw out something, though that's maybe not too much, but throw out something that allows them to test it out. And that may mean free, but at the end of the day, we also know that when doing that with an agency community, that's going to get back to our core marketer and manufacturer clients, and they're going to have that sort of expectation. That's what we expect from you. And I would say that other people that are in our position that have both data and analytics should be willing to do that type of activity, again, with the appropriate scale, but should be willing to do it. And if they're not, then I would think that notion, a beautiful notion of transparency and kumbaya, is something that you should be questioning.
Yeah, so I just want to get back to, and I don't want to dive into the privacy debate particularly, but I think that this issue of regulation or self-regulation is such an important one. But let's start off with, I don't know, Keith, who do you think owns the data before we regulate or talk about self-regulation? So, what about data ownership?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it depends on the application is the short answer. If we tend to use the retail industry as a proxy, in that the long-standing belief is that there are two owners in any transaction, one of which is the company who you transact with, and the other is the consumer that creates the transaction. And so both of those people are owners in that data. And that's the belief that we hold. And if there are businesses that own that transaction or own that data, they also have certain rights about that. And those rights can include use for themselves to help improve their own advertising performance campaigns, or to license and resell that as a monetary gain and a part of their business. So that's my short answer.
Matt?
Well, I think it's a murky issue because when you think about online web behavior, there are so many parties involved in any individual event. You've got in the offline world, it's a little simpler because a person goes into a store and buys something, and there's a purchaser and a seller, and we're mostly done except for the credit card companies who are in the middle. But otherwise, we're mostly done. Online, if I go to a website and I click, there's probably 3 or 4 ISPs that were involved there, and then there's me, and there's the people who own the site, but then there's the people who made the site's content management system, and that may be hosted by a blogging platform, and this just gets really murky really quickly. So rather than trying to outline really defined rules for exactly who owns what we believe in is an open and transparent conversation with the people involved around what data is going to be collected, what the attributes of that data are, and how it's going to be used. And if everyone's clear up front about what those boundaries are, then creating rules for ownership isn't as important as making sure that the people you partner with are well informed and the users themselves are well informed about what's being used by whom and for what.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's all very well and good, but in Europe, and it's kind of looming here, there are legislators who are talking about not only does the consumer own the data, but if the consumer wants the data back, we have to be able to be prepared to give them all their data back. So I mean, it's I don't know, JP, if you've got a view on this, but just in terms of ownership, but it seems to be a battle that's slipping away from us, right?
Yes, it's interesting. Yeah, give them their data. They probably would scare them. Look, we've tried to stay away from a couple of the components around sort of the internet side, behavioral side online, because it's a little off strategy for us. We have a relationship with the consumers that is an open relationship. We're telling them what we're doing, and we're doing it in a way that we're reporting back to them. And in the case of the retailers, it's a thing that's reporting it. It's sales, but it's difficult to give that data back to an individual consumer. So we're in a sort of a different position, and we look at our partners having to go and deal with some of these other issues. That said, I think you've got a notion towards the opt-in consumer, the idea that consumers are going to want to be a part of this conversation. This gets back to the transparency, and you to be able to go with a promise that the reason that we're using your data, I'm not that interested, John, in what you do on an individual basis. I'm sure it's fun, but it needs to scale at a level in which we're able to describe it for a lot of people, right? So our feeling has always been that we'd love to be able to see these consumers have feedback loops in which they're a part of this conversation, so that they know and understand why it is that this data is important. So they get the stuff that's the Ferrari guy that's going out, he gets a different brochure if he actually wants to buy a Ferrari as opposed to dream about having a Ferrari. That's the important part of that. And then certainly, our relationship with, in particular, the retail community, which has a very large company in it, is very stringent about what they do, and we need to follow what they're doing from an industry perspective. So, giving the consumer the data back is an interesting thing. I would hate to see regulation come into this for a variety of reasons, but the idea of being able to have a conversation with a consumer about what their data allows us to do and do for them, not against them, but with them, I think would be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's a terrific discussion, and I know one that we could have for a long time. I know Steve wants us to give you an opportunity of grilling the vendors as well, because part of this is for you to be able to ask as many, or at least ask some pertinent questions of the team. So Steve, can we hand it over to the floor? Are there any questions that you have for the team? If you want to direct it directly at one of them, please do so. Otherwise, I will direct the question for you. It can't be this easy.
I wanted to ask about I've got a question for Matt. Excuse me. Can you give me an example, and if I understand your business, where you have a client, maybe they've got a big pile of offline data that they use to build some models, and their clients go sell some stuff, and then you merge to it some of your online data, and in what ways is it additive? Right, as a predictive modeler, I might think, well, I've got some pretty good stuff here, and I'm not convinced, or convince me that adding some online data to my offline pile of data is additive.
Sure. So just to clarify our custom advertiser modeling offering, it's predominantly based on online actions on a marketer's website. And so the way it works is if you're selling any particular thing online, we deploy some code to your site at your request, and we identify, or you identify for us, your best customers, the people who you'd really like to get more of. And then we go out and build behavioral models of how those people have consumed content across the web over hundreds and hundreds of different events. And our models are then able to build a statistical model of how to predict that a person will take that action. How do we guarantee to the marketer that that's actually working? We'll run campaigns on a CPA basis, so we actually encourage people to do that. We put an article out in, I think it was Ad Age recently, talking about how real-time buying needs a new model that's not just impression-based, because if you're going to tell people you're going to drive into incremental conversions for them, you should actually have a little skin in that game. And so that's how our model works today. We haven't had an offering that does that same kind of custom modeling based on offline data, like Keith's company does quite a lot of. But in the online world, we back that up by saying, well, only pay us if we sell things for you.
Yeah, and I just add a little bit of color to that. We do quite a bit of extensive work in the offline space with offline transactional data. We do see value add in online data as well. And for us, it's not so much about the channel, offline is online, it's really about intent versus transaction. Going back to the Ferrari example, who has the intention of purchasing a Ferrari versus who actually purchases it. So when we talk about building statistical models, what we find is that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. So in the modeling process, past behavior, actual transactions or events that matter to brands or to advertisers tend to weigh very, very heavily in those models.
I would also say that behavior is changing with the usage of devices. I was at a conference last week, and one of the things that was presented that just kind of floored everybody was that mobile shoppers tend to really be strongly male, which is against what everybody in this audience would have thought normally. So why is that, right? So when you start getting information like that, how do you apply that now to all of your other data, and how do you make then decisions on how to target these users and what they're doing? So to me, that was a really interesting point where we took this out of mobile, but you could get similar insights out of online or other channels.
There's a person at the back.
Curious if any of you have any feeling as the Lumascape slide continues to fill up and the logos get smaller and smaller. Do you think it's going to be acquisition or attrition that's going to happen between all of the companies within that ecosystem?
Yes.
Agreed, yes, both.
So both acquisition and attrition. But is there room on the Lumascape slide for more?
I would say this: if you compare it to the offline space, the online space is new media or new medium. There's very few data aggregators, data providers, data sources in the offline space. I could count them on both hands, the ones that really matter. So when you talk about move to the online space, my view is you're going to end up with a similar sort of situation where there's a small number of companies who can bring things at scale that add value to advertisers really, really well. So in the long view, you probably won't have more in terms of number. You may have different logos on the slide.
I mean, it doesn't matter which forecast you look at, eMarketer or any of these. Everybody's expecting there to be a lot more revenue in this particular part of the world in online marketing than there was last year or the year before, and the ramp on that keeps looking pretty steep. So is there room for more companies to make money? Sure, and venture capitalists see that, and they'll keep pumping money into the ecosystem. But the real question is, for somebody to be really effective at sorting through hundreds of billions of data points per month and doing that in real time, reacting to that as quickly as possible so you can take advantage of the signal as quickly as possible, what's the investment required to get to that level? Because there are some companies, and we're one of them, that can do that. The investment that's required to do that in people, in science, in technology is really significant. So just because there's more revenue to be had doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's got an equal shot at going after it.
Yeah, it's a great point, and we need to wrap up quickly. But I think what I'm hearing is that there's so many unanswered questions. There's money moving from television to video. We don't know how to measure between screens yet. If data and if the suppliers of data can start answering those questions and improve our ROI, I think that there's plenty of room. Just to wrap up, just literally half a minute each. Lara, would you start off with what are we going to see this year, do you think, from DataXu or companies like yours, and what do you think are some of the exciting developments that might happen maybe 3 years into the future?
So I think to your point, what's going to really start happening this year is that people are going to finally start really figuring out how to identify users across devices in a way that you can go to market with it, right? So not just kind of testing from the back end. And I think that's what's going to drive what's going to happen over the course of 3 years. I think that, we're already seeing that mobile is exceeding usage in some areas of web, and now it's kind of going up against TV, but TV is changing as well. So I think we're going to be living in this kind of omnipresent world where we're always on, and I think that devices and channels are going to be less important. It's going to be more about you as a consumer, how you're interacting. So I think over the next 3 years, we're going to see much more targeted, directed advertising using data around a lot more variables than what we have today.
Keith?
Yeah, we hold a similar view in that the future really is about audiences and how do you reach Jane Doe across all of her different types of devices, whether it's her postal box, her mobile phone, email, or online. So that exists, that technology exists today. We do that for advertisers. The challenge is it's not simple. So really when we look to 2013 and beyond, the question is how do you make that simple for advertisers, and how do you make that obtainable for people who don't have very large brand budgets to spend?
Matt?
I think if you think about performance marketing, I think that as attribution models get better and buyers get better about attribution, we'll see a weaning away from retargeting as the standard performance tactic. It gets a lot of credit, but probably too much credit because you're showing up right before somebody buys something. And there will be more focus paid to full funnel marketing on acquiring prospects and driving them all the way through.
I would say pervasiveness in the short term, more and more of our data will become, and data like ours will become available in 2013, but the more interesting part will be the notion of automated analytics, not in the behavioral side, but in the real-time linkage to sales, basically from a brick and mortar perspective. What we do in our current practices for trade and consumer and to some extent marketing mix will become online so that you can look at something not 3 months from now because of a study that's been done, but what happened last week? Did it move sales? What can I do to optimize it? What can I do to optimize it not only behaviorally, but also at a place like stores and so on? So automated analytics, I think, will be the big thing.
Fantastic. You've been a terrific panel. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Thanks, panel.